This informative and impartial seminar will run through what the referendum is all about and help answer your questions. What is the referendum question exactly? What happens if the majority votes yes or no? What's included in the proposed cannabis legislation and control bill? What will and won't be allowed under the proposed legislation? What could my vote mean for my community? The Cannabis Referendum FAQ workshop is free on Thursday the 24th of September from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m, but registrations are essential. Register at wal.org.nz.
Do not adjust your devices or change the frequencies. This is Blowing from the Antipodean star system, 2 million light years away from your galaxy. Due to our incursion onto Waiheke Island to investigate the Coconut Wireless Blues show, we are now pleased to report that this show is syndicated in over 7 galaxies at this moment as we speak. It's a great success playing the blues, as only Mr. Kipper can, every Wednesday night from 5 till 8 p.m. on 88.3 and 107.4. Fantastic, Mr. Kipper. The galaxies applaud you and your choice and your taste. We find it impeccable. So this is Blue saying tune in around the world. Join the 2 million listeners listening to the Coconut Wireless Blues Show.
Waiheke Radio.
Kia ora koutou, welcome everyone, welcome to this Island Life special on Waiheke Radio, Waiheke's community radio station. This is the great Waiheke Radio Auckland Central Electorate candidates debate. The title's so long I can't even remember it. It's my great pleasure to have the 3 top contenders for the Auckland Central seat with us here this evening. I've got Chloe Swarbrick from the Greens. Is it Green or Greens? Hold on, bring your mics up. There we go.
Te Roa, New Zealand, but you can say the Greens.
Okay,
yeah.
And we have Emma Mellow.
Good evening.
Yeah, Emma, who's standing for National, and Helen White.
Standing for Labour, just in case you're worried.
Yeah, kia ora. Okay.
Kia ora.
So kia ora koutou, haere mai ki ngā kotono rohi pōti ki te reo irirangi o Waiheke. Welcome along to Waiheke Radio. It's great to have you all here. So this candidates debate, in a moment we'll kind of introduce you to everyone who's here, but this is very much a focus on the electorate role. We're going to hear a lot from your party leaders about party policies and so on, and we will touch on those, and those will come into your positions, no doubt. But we really, we're parochial here. We're activists and lunatics.
Can't wait.
Yeah. And we kind of wear that as a badge of honour because that means that we're engaged and impassioned.
Same.
So that's what we're all about. And so we're very much kind of wanting to know, about your take on our local issues and how you will be able to affect that and impact that and steer that as our electorate MP if you are successful on the date. What is it? 17th of October. Yeah, great. Okay, so some people are listening on air and can't see. We're going out on air, we're on our stream, and we're on Facebook Live, but some people will be listening. So just so they can kind of, I suppose, pick the voices and know who's who, I'm just going to get each of you, and we'll just start off with you, Chloe, just kind of 30 seconds, who are you, what's your background, how have you come to this?
30 seconds.
Yep.
Kia ora koutou, kia ora tātou te whānau. My name is Chloe Swarbrick. I have been a Green Party MP for the past 2.5, 3 or so years, playing a role in confidence and supply with about a dozen portfolios because we're in a small party, where I think that we have shown that we can punch above our weight in contributing on social and environmental and climate justice issues. I'm also an Auckland Central local, so live just off of Karangahape Road.
Great. Okay, Emma Mellow from National. Tell us about yourself.
Good evening. I'm 30 years old. I live in the Electorate with my fiancé Chris. I've got 9 years of commercial experience, most recently at a major New Zealand bank. I love Waiheke. In the past 2 months, I've been here 6 times. I think it's really important that you need to spend a lot of time here to understand the local issues and looking forward to debating them tonight.
Great. And Helen?
Kia ora. My name's Helen White and I am the Labour Party candidate. I grew up in Freeman's Bay, so I was there when it was 1971 when I moved in. Know this island well, as it has changed. I'm an employment lawyer. I do basically labour law for about 6 different unions and a range of small businesses and NGOs, quite a few NGOs actually. I am a mother of 3 children.
Okay, well, thank you to all of you. So we sent you all a question that we wanted you to start off with tonight. And as I say, this is all about the electorate role. So we're going to give each of you a few moments to answer this question, and then I'm going to give you a chance to kind of react to each other's answers as well, and kind of, reflect on what the others have said. So the question we asked all of the candidates to come along prepared to answer was, what do you see as the most significant issue facing Waiheke that you can impact on as our electorate MP? And what would you like to do about it? So Emma, you're the kind of the newest to the scene around here, so I'm going to start off with you.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, Waiheke, much like many communities in New Zealand, needs jobs. They need a government who has a plan for jobs to support small businesses. We've come out with a number of policies which will benefit people of Waiheke. Obviously, tax relief, giving an economic stimulus for most people of around $3,000 per year. We've also got Job Start and Business Start. So if you employ a new person, you'll get a $10,000 grant from National and the government to help you grow your business. We'll also back people who have lost their jobs over this period to take some money out of their KiwiSaver, have some advice, and be able to start their own business. We're facing some of the worst economic situations in recent history. In the past, actually 160 years. We're going to have 200,000 more people on unemployed, and we've currently got 212,000 on unemployment benefits. We need a strong plan. In the current situation, Labour has us in deficit for 15 years. That's just not good enough. We need a plan to get out of that and to grow.
Okay, thank you.
$4 billion hole.
Yep. So we'll come back to you. You'll get your chance to. Don't worry. You'll be able to dig.
Oh no!
Don't worry. We'll get there.
Yeah.
Okay, Helen White. So what is the most significant issue you see facing Waiheke, and what would you do about it as an electorate MP?
I think that this island has a problem being actually affordable to the people who've lived here for a long time. That is a bit of a cheat of an answer because it's multi-pronged. There are things like the affordability of housing, and there is the capacity to work on the island. There is the ability to stay on the island as you get older, and that is very connected with the need for healthcare to really cover that period. So I think it's a problem in the city in general that this was an affordable place to live and it was inclusive. And I remember when people would come from Freeman's Bay to live on Waiheke because it was a place you could be an artist and you could have a really interesting life. And that's become a bit unattainable for people now.
Right, thank you. And Chloe Swarbrick, to you.
So I absolutely actually don't disagree with the starting premise of both Emma and Helen in terms of people being able to find employment that is meaningful and pays well, and also on the point of affordability. And those two things are actually quite deeply interconnected. I think the challenge is how we go about actually achieving those, but we'll get to those shortly. For me, I think, however, just to really dig down into something that is a quite measurable thing that one can do as a local representative, it would be in the area of changing up the PTOM so that folks who are needing to travel across from the islands to the central city are able to do so in an affordable manner, but also so that there is greater local input and local government input, and we can get into the super city I'm sure later, but greater local input on the timing of the ferries as well.
All right, so three different takes on the significant issues facing the island, and I sort of give you a chance to kind of react to each other and kind of give some feedback on those. So, Helen, we'll start with you. Do you want to kind of respond to what you've heard from the other two candidates?
It's interesting how cohesive they really are. Obviously, jobs are an incredibly important thing, and I, as an employment lawyer, I've prioritised them in my work. I think they're incredibly important to people's self-esteem and their feeling of belonging and their ability to contribute rather than just be patronised. It's not just about actually people giving things. It's about feeling like you own the space and you can earn a decent living. And that's actually been my motivation for getting into politics. I've been really, really worried that wages went diving too low. It means that when we recover, it's going to be really, really important that we recover well, that we think about that and we actually build good jobs. And it's not just about our tourism being based on the lowest possible dollar of the wage that people are being paid. That's incredibly important to making this society a much nicer one. I guess the PTOM issue is a really important one here.
Yeah, and we will come back to that.
Yeah, we'll come back to it then. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Emma, do you want to respond to the other two candidates?
Sure. I think if Labor had a plan for jobs, they wouldn't be spending $1 billion more on welfare. They'd be laying out their job creation plans, which they haven't done. And on the point on affordable housing, under this government, rents have raised on average $65 per week. We've actually got a plan to address this cause issue, which is to repeal the RMA and to introduce new legislation which would make building houses more affordable and reduce that compliance cost.
Can I respond to the issue over rent? I'm just really concerned to hear that when we actually heard people saying that landlords were being advised to stop putting in heating systems into houses because they hoped for a change of government to national. We have brought in really good rental law recently, which will give people much more stability than they've ever had. We haven't had the kinds of settings we need for people renting for a long time, and it happened under National's watch.
And if I can respond to both of those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so if I may, on the point around, in particular, kind of Emma's lean into the usual kind of stuff that we see out of the Nats at this point in the electoral cycle, which is kind of the beneficiary bashing and talking about people on welfare as though they don't necessarily have a whole lot to contribute. I'd just like to say that in reference...
Chloe.
Yeah, same. So on that point, I'd just like to say that when we reflect on particularly the kind of economic recession that we are presently heading into kind of head first, actually Aotearoa New Zealand's history, look back 100 odd years at what happened in the 1930s, subsequent to then the Great Depression, the World Wars, where we had the introduction of the welfare state, actually the introduction of taxation, which attempted to level that wealth gap. And in turn, we had 70 odd years of massive economic prosperity and the building up of this country. The other thing that I'd say around the points that Emma also raised around the increases of rents under this government, that is not something that happened in isolation. That is something that happened in, I'd say as well, to the point around the repeal and replacement of the RMA. Last government had a decade to get on with, but didn't, instead intended to tinker around the edges. This government has made it incredibly clear, and the Greens being part of that, that we intend to protect the environment, but also to ensure that there is more building. The other thing, however, that we need to know is that in Auckland, right now, there are 40,000 vacant properties. That is because it is oftentimes, as a result of the capital gains that can be gained, it is a lot more, the incentives are there to leave a property vacant and to enable that escalation for sake of sale further down the track. So actually ensuring that we have those incentives and the balance right around taxation is incredibly important. The fact that working people are having to pay huge amounts in income tax, whereas those who are simply making money off of wealth don't, I think is incredibly unfair.
All right, well, there's a couple of big issues there I think we can pick up on. So we've got housing, jobs and transport, and we will dig into all of those. We might start off with that area of jobs and the local economy. So one of the things, just for people listening or watching on Facebook, if you want to, you can post feedback on the Waiheke Radio Facebook page, and we can take care of that feedback, and we can bring some of that into the debate later on as well. But we also went out earlier this week to our community and gathered questions to put to you, since we couldn't have a live audience. So just so this came from Christina Hyde, who's the chair of Waiheke Island Tourism Incorporated. And what Christina is asking is, pre-COVID, the visitor economy contributed $112 million per day to New Zealand and employed over 14% of New Zealand's total workforce. Waiheke's reliance on the visitor economy is even greater. Other than the wage subsidy, what policies will you and your party support or bring in to directly support tourism businesses and employment on Waiheke? It's a big question. So, Anyone want to kick off?
I think what we can say is that we've made it incredibly clear in this government's response to COVID-19 that the thing that needs to be priorities first and foremost is the health and safety of New Zealanders and of those who are coming into this country. If we are going to risk oscillating into another lockdown, then we are at risk of doing far greater damage in the long run, and actually in the short term as well, to our economy should we need to go into another lockdown. So ensuring that we have the requisite safeguards in place is perhaps the most important thing. The other is around stimulating domestic tourism, ensuring that New Zealanders feel comfortable and free to travel amongst all of the different regions across Aotearoa.
Okay, Emma?
Yeah, if I can just add to that. So I'm bringing Todd McClay, our tourism spokesperson, to the island shortly. We're going to be meeting with tourism businesses. We've got a policy, 100 million for tourist businesses to apply for, to pivot their businesses and to work in this new environment. But most importantly, as a safe border, and to make sure that we do the job properly, we contract trace and we test at the border to stop these damaging lockdowns which are hurting our small businesses. But more importantly, on Waiheke, I'm hearing these terrible stories of small businesses, cafe down the road, in fact, who wants to employ more people and wants to employ people, but they've got these people who are on working visas who can't transfer between employers on the island. So they're stuck in bureaucracy. So if this is a real priority for the government, they would have dug in and made some efficiencies here instead of people stopping things like opening their business at night or and letting people work.
There were definitely plans for visas to be transferable. There's a much broader issue there with regard to the visas because, as an employment lawyer, I know you get a lot of vulnerability in a situation where the visa is linked to an individual business, and it's a lot better model that people can move. And my understanding is that discretion is being used to allow that at the moment. To go to the broader issue of tourism on the island, I think Waiheke is a really lucky island in that it is going to be a very attractive location for local people to come. I think the big issue that I've heard from people who are running maybe the vineyards here and other places that are tourist spots is that the prohibitive price of the ferries is a problem, that it's just not working in terms of encouraging that business. And that comes back to the PTOM. I think that's something we can definitely move on. There was a review of the PTOM underway, and I had Michael Wood out here a few months ago talking about that because it should have been out by now.
It should have been done. It should have been done. In the meantime, people in Waiheke are dealing a bad deal. They need accountability.
Which was put in place by the former national government, I might add.
It seems incredibly rich, Emma. Like, this was something that the national government did. It allowed a monopoly player to have this island and hold them to ransom. And then for some reason you seem entirely innocent about it. And I don't understand that. This island should never have had that arrangement done, and it was done under your watch, and yet now you're shocked.
Well, I think if it was a priority for you, you would have done it by now. It's something that is a priority
for me. It is
a
priority. It was what Michael Wood said is it was so difficult to unwind it because of the contract that had been made. It was actually better to review it and replace it than to take the time to cancel and have the litigation that would have followed. So it is something that is absolutely a commitment of this government.
Fantastic. Look forward to seeing it.
Yes, so do I.
So we're all in agreement then that the public transport operating model should apply for the Auckland Waiheke route. Is that what we're saying?
Yes.
And further, I'd say there's a lot of work to be done with regard to ferries. It's a wider issue. This is look at what's happened with the Harbour Bridge. Imagine if we had ferries that were actually working efficiently all around our harbour.
That is why we want to invest $300 million into the ferry infrastructure.
I thought you wanted to create another bridge.
But we do as well. We've got a significant $31 billion infrastructure package actually to help Auckland unclog its roads and increase ferries.
Building more roads.
So let's take a wider look at transport. But you've got something more to say on the
I just wanted to add, on top of talking about people and transport therein, I was out at is the waste kind of resource management centre that you guys have recently just taken back control of, I believe in June of this year, after losing that contract as a result of some pretty shady stuff happening at council back in 2009. And what I was hearing out there is that one of the massive issues facing resource management here on the island is not only obviously making sure that it's sorted and otherwise, but it's also the transport back to the mainland, and the fact that right now, with that route being under monopoly, that it is so difficult to provide that and in turn to make it affordable for people to do things like recycle.
Can I just have a word here on the wages of those workers? That's the one thing I don't want to see a compromise on. I think that often we see these things as we can make these things cheaper by the wages going down.
Oh, totally. That's not at all what
I think that's exactly the kind of marker that's a difference between the National Party and actually the Labour and the Greens. We are looking for an economy that's sustainable and humane.
And serves people in the planet.
We want to support businesses to keep employing people. This is a great idea that they both have for times where the economy is doing really well.
The economy exists on the planet.
Well, it's
so let's go back
government.
let's go back to transport, which is what we're starting on. So we've got the issue of transport to the island. So we've got the Fuller's route, and we've got that whole question of the public transport operating model, and you're all in agreement that should change. I don't know if people have worked through the full implications of what that's going to mean in terms of pricing. Is it going to, if prices come lower, is that going to mean we have more tourists? And then we've got a different question we need to deal with later about infrastructure and so on. So, okay, so we've got that. Then we've got transport on the island. So we've got, a place here where we have narrow roads, no footpaths, a number of groups who are looking at how we can put more emphasis on cycling and walking, and moving away from vehicle transport. And then, we've got the question of public transport on the island and so on. So there's been a lot of consultation, a lot of work done on plans such as the pathways plan for the island, and Auckland Transport have been involved in that consultation and so on. And everyone seems to be in agreement, but nothing happens. It's about actually getting the stuff rolling, actually getting the funding up so that those projects can get underway and we can have some kind of cohesive approach which allows people to get to the ferry, to get to where they need to go on the island, but also starts to move away from that heavy reliance on private vehicles. So that's another big question for you. So how do you, as the local MP, have some impact on that to, literally get people moving, but to get people moving in a variety of ways that are going to have some kind of environmental spin-off and so on as well?
Well, perhaps you've got to be an activist and a lunatic. I think that's the real takeaway.
But we've got the activists and lunatics.
But you need one who's actively representing and is willing to push this out more than just writing letters to Mayor Goff, but is actually willing to sit down and work with him. On top of that, is willing to take this into the halls of power. I think that's one of the things that I was actually most looking forward to, and I'm glad that I'm stoked to now be running with Emma, but I had been looking forward to challenging the former deputy leader of the National Party on the fact that it felt as though there was a real divergence between the things that were being said on the ground and then the statements and the positions that were being made as part of the broader National Party, particularly when in government. And you saw that divergence playing out in things like the Skypath, the massive delays on the City Rail link, and I think so too that this here is one of the big issues that we really have to grapple with, is how we get that congruence and that ability to be an activist on the ground and take it into Parliament and make it happen, not just be part and parcel of a bigger hierarchy.
I guess what I'm going to say is probably fairly obvious. The best way to get that is to have somebody as the local MP who's connected with the main party and can actually be that voice for what we need on this island in government. That's actually one of the most pragmatic things that I think I can offer if Labour comes into government.
Well, I think the most important thing is actually to be hard-working and advocate for the people, no matter where you are in government or not.
Yeah.
On terms of transport, we've actually said we will increase the funding for local boards to make priorities, like in Waiheke, transport projects a priority, right? Because at the moment, Auckland Council funds those projects on a per capita basis, not a per visitor basis. And that is an issue I've been discussing with the local board here, and will be a strong advocate for improving.
It's cool that the Nats are now moving towards some form of localism when they amalgamated and made the super city such a mess, which in turn has created a lot of problems for Waiheke.
Well, it's created
nonetheless.
I mean, it's delivered some great infrastructure for Auckland. We wouldn't have the Vic Park Tunnel and a number of other Waterview Tunnel without the super city. But yes, there's things we've got to improve, and they need a lot more accountability, particularly here on the island.
Yeah, and I want to come back to the question of the super city legislation later on, because it's a big one, and it has been from the very instigation here on the island. Did we hear from everyone on transport? I think we did.
I think we did.
Broadly,
Yeah.
I think there's...
But
We're quite loud, aren't we?
That's fine. I just want to pick up on that integration between the local MP role and the local body, because I went to our local board chair, Kath Hanley, to see what questions she had for you. One of her questions was, how would you establish an effective working relationship with Auckland's mayor, our councillor and our local board? And what issues would you expect to be working on with each of them as soon as the election is over? So there's two bits in there. There's the relationship, and then what's the priority for that relationship? What are the issues you're going to take forward? So I think we'll start with you, Helen White.
Okay, so I have quite a strong relationship with the mayor already. I have known him for a long time, and I've had quite good discussions with him. I think that the question that Kath might be asking with regard to what priorities there are is probably one that's local rather than across Auckland. I think that there's a lot of room to move in the space of these, actually just what we were talking about before, the transport issues. Like, there may well be shovel-ready projects that can be done on the island that will progress that kind of thing. We really do need the island to become cyclable and walkable. It makes sense on the island, and it will help a lot of things. It would help tourism, it would help jobs. Those are the kinds of things where it would be extremely useful to have that relationship with the local body as well as the mayor. I think it's really important, and I think everybody's touched on it. It's probably just actually a learning out of the super city that there isn't quite enough local connection in it. It was too overarching, and it did lose that sense of connection. And I actually think everybody has got there. I think we all know that, and we want that connection to happen. So it's important that the local MP, whoever they are, works with those people as well, because there's an identification of what's important in every community that needs to happen, and it needs to come from the its own community. This is quite a special community. It's quite different from the rest of the electorate. And I think that we all recognise that.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
absolutely.
So, Chloe Swarbrick, we'll go to you next. That relationship building between mayor, councillor and local board.
I think it's simply about establishing those lines of communication. I mean, I also know Phil, and I've known him for about 4 years when I ran against him in 2016 for local body elections. And he, as Emma did just the other day, because I don't have a car, managed to share a lot of conversations with him, as I did with Emma just the other day. So on that point, I would just simply refer to actually my track record in doing things like this. So with groups of people who have often been pushed into the margins or told that they don't necessarily matter. So university students in particular, I managed to work together across a bunch of different unis that were implicated in challenges around the first and now the second lockdown, and bring together what ended up being a cross-party kind of consensus on the need for an inquiry into student accommodation, which we found to be deeply under-regulated. I'd also say that it's the same kind of thing that I've managed to establish with some small businesses in the centre of the city, particularly Elliott Stables, who I've been working with now since about March, and I've just heard that there's some similar challenges here with some tough commercial landlords. So that's all just about bringing people together. I mean, my background in small business and now over the past 3 years in politics has basically taught me one thing, and that's that anything is possible with relationships and requisite willpower. It's simply a matter of bringing all of those things to the table through collaboration and creativity.
Okay, Emma Mellow.
Absolutely. Look, well, my background, having worked at big organisations like ANZ, Sydney Airport, it's about problem solving and it's about building connections. That's really important. Over the weekend, I said that I would be opening an office here on Waiheke if I'm elected, because it's a real priority to make sure that these constituency cases are get the attention they need. Nikki Kay's done a fantastic job. I want to continue her legacy here on the island, and absolutely need really strong working relationships with all levels of government. I'm having a meeting with Mayor Goff this week. I know the councillors and local board, and I've been reaching out with them and talking to them about the issues. And you talk to anyone since I've been selected, I should say. Sorry, I've talked to 1,500 households here across Auckland Central, and one of the biggest issues they raise with me actually is Auckland Council and issues they have with AT. I mean, you've just got to be on Queen Street to see the mess it is at the moment. So you need to be a strong advocate and build those relationships from day one.
And I think that means getting alongside actually Auckland Council as opposed to necessarily seeing it as a barrier, because what ends up happening oftentimes in politics, and I know this particularly being in a small party in Parliament, is that if you back people who you see or caricature as your opponents into a corner, you're never going to get anything done. So it's about getting everybody who is necessary to solve that piece of the puzzle together.
Which of the three of you has set up or had a meeting with our local board chair, Kath Hanley?
Not yet.
Me.
Emma Mellow?
Yeah, I've been in the role. I had 2 weeks in campaigning so
Helen
far,
White?
and I made it a
No, I
priority.
haven't.
No? So Emma Mellow's had a meeting with the local board chair. Okay, let's move on.
I have met with the Aotea Great Barrier Board chair, but not yet.
And I've
Kath.
met Kath.
Right.
She's been at various things, but I haven't had a meeting with
She's
her.
a wonderful advocate for Waiheke.
All right. Okay, so let's carry on that kind of super city issue then, since we're on that. So the legislation's been in place for a number of years. You've all expressed concerns about how it's operating. We can go back and look at, I mean, to my mind, it's operating exactly as it was intended. It was set up to have the council-controlled organisations operate at arm's length and not have that close accountability, and it's doing exactly that. It was designed to reduce, some of the local power that people wanted, and it's doing that very well. And now people have kind of, as we said here on Waiheke all along, that's not the right way to do it. So what I would like to know is, and I talked to Nikki Kay, your predecessor, Emma, just a couple of weeks ago about this, and she said, we could probably got it about 70% right. So and we've got 30% wrong. Labor has had 3 years to address super city legislation. It hasn't. What would you change? That's what I want to know. What bits of that legislation would you change? So we'll start with, I'll let Emma go first on this, since National are the architects of it.
Sure. So there's recently been the CCO review. And if you speak to someone like Denise Lee, our spokesperson for local body politics in Auckland, who was a previous councillor, you can see there's a lot of accountability issues and a lot of governance issues. So I'm not in a position to announce anything today on this, but we definitely want to see more accountability from our council moving forward.
I thought the way at the moment was your party was just people just announce stuff whenever they want.
Not my pay grade.
Okay, Helen White, what would you change in that legislation?
I think that there's a connection between this and also the RMA review.
Yeah.
I think what came out really strongly in that was that the RMA doesn't have enough layers in it of identification of things by the local community. So I think when I first stood 3 years ago, when somebody asked me this question and I hadn't been prepped for it, and I said I was always concerned about the super city in terms of connecting with people, because you're basically voting for somebody you've never heard of. Quite often. It's as simple as that. There's just not that local connection. But I saw, and people like Phil Twyford have been big advocates of the scale of it and how it does have advantages. So I think it's something I've never wanted to throw the baby out with the bathwater in. There's a lot of good things in it. I think it's about that sense of community, and I think we still have quite a strong sense of community across the city in pockets. So you see Waiheke is its own community, but actually that's true of West Auckland and South Auckland. I think all those areas need strengthening at that local level. But it can't be a charade. It can't be that we're just voting for a person we've never heard of. It actually needs to be a level of engagement. So we need a lot more clarity about what our local boards do, and they have to be given the power to do something other than to sort of twiddle their thumbs.
Totally.
And when you get to the RMA change, I can see something like here, that identification by the local groups of what's really important is landmarks. That's a really important thing. And once it starts to be proactive, it's not so disengaging. At the moment, it's sort of just a sort of stop. We're not, we won't do this because you're objecting so much, rather than a proactive attempt. And I think that's what gets people engaged, and both structures need that more.
Okay.
If I can.
Yep,
yeah, so on that, I mean, there's a number of things to unpack. I'd really love to kind of start dealing with the RMA, but I'll park that for 1 second and just refer to the super city. And local government, because I won't get super constitutional nerdy, but local government, because Aotearoa is a constitutional monarchy, exists by virtue of legislation from our parliament. What that means is that there is this really weird relationship where there's kind of only its existence only is so because of the way that Parliament is legislated for it, which is why we've ended up with some of these messages from Auckland Council. What ended up, or rather the catalyst for the super city, was largely born out of this culture that we've seen permeating from central government for several decades now, which is this increasing blame of local government for an inability to grapple with things or to fund projects that they actually don't have the money to fund. And that is part and parcel a manifestation of the problem of their ability to raise resources. A huge amount of the resources that Auckland Council has over the past 3 or so years pivoted away from solely relying on rates, which in turn has perhaps caused some of the issues with regard to the emergency budget, but again, parking that. What we did do in these first 3 years of this government is institute a review of what's called the Shand Inquiry, which happened about 10 years ago, looking into, through the Productivity Commission, how many resources local government actually has to deal with the issues that are on the ground, actually to instigate things like the so-called 10-year plans. And what it found is that basically the system is entirely screwed up. That system then ends up producing this culture of everybody pointing fingers at each other and things kind of being stymied. So I think that it is a structural, legal kind of problem therein. Local Government New Zealand's actually come to the table with some incredible proposals around localism therein, and I think that we can learn some of these lessons from the super city, the likes of housing and urban development coming out of like a broader approach as Twyford and Minister Julian Genter have been working on, but also making sure that we retain that sense of localism. I'd say, however, that this goes hand in hand with ideas of people living in stable housing as well. And then just on the RMA, finally, the RMA is a beast of attempting to protect our natural environment. It's not necessarily actually a code that is supposed to exist to design beautiful buildings or high density or whatever else, and that's reflected in the review. And what has come out of that is effectively that perhaps we should have 2 pieces of legislation, and I know that we're currently grappling with that.
And that's what we want to do. We want to choose 2 pieces.
Yeah, I was going to follow up on that RMA thing because, of course, it's one of those things, that some people want the RMA reformed so they can have faster, easier, less restricted development, and other people want the RMA reformed to give more protection. So, so I think you've outlined where you are on that, Chloe.
Oh no, I'm really clearly on that. So the Greens' position is, as it always has been, that we can have both. We can have thriving nature if we do development properly with community consultation. And on that, it's probably worthwhile to reflect on something that I was involved in an Environment Select Committee over the past 2.5 years, which is where in the latest RMA amendment in September this past year, we were contemplating a number of kind of smaller changes around the edges, particularly around water quality. And therein, we had a huge amount of submissions, approximately 100 odd, from members of the public who were calling for a reinstatement of what's called tree protection. That was ripped out of the Resource Management Act by the former National Party governments, and as a result of that, we've subsequently seen over the past 8 years a decline of approximately 1/3 of urban tree protection across Auckland. I advocated to put that back in. I was the only member on that committee who advocated to put that back in, and it was shot down by New Zealand First, by the National Party, and by Labour.
So let's come to you, Helen White, on the RMA. What are the changes you want to see?
So my understanding, and actually it was because at the last candidate debate where you talked about that, Chloe, the National Party stand-in for you, Emma, said that in fact the reason that the groups had had not done that change was because it was in the wrong place, that you were asking for it in the wrong place. That's just what I heard. What I have done since then is looked at the new pieces of legislation. I totally agree we should be protecting the trees. That actually isn't the problem here. As I understand it, it was protected on Waiheke and it hasn't been throughout Auckland. It's something I totally agree needs protecting. And I have been talking to the guys who are in, there's a little sort of place where they've been all camping out, trying to protect it.
You're right. I mean, the tree rules are different here than they are in Auckland Central, so we don't have to, we can, of course we're worried about our trees, but let's get to the RMA.
Chris, I'll get to that. So the RMA piece of legislation apparently is 880 pages or something. It's ridiculous. It's out of date. And it isn't proactive, and it isn't actually an integrated piece of legislation. And yes, it looks like the proposal, and it is only a proposal at this stage, it's quite a deep review, is to put up something that is a way more interesting piece of legislation that will bring in really beautiful design, it will bring in very much consultation and involvement of Māori. It's going to be a really good piece of legislation. I think we're all excited about that possibility. I don't think anyone isn't. I think the major issue is just when people do this thing where they say it's all about slashing the red tape. It's not. It doesn't mean that it is perfect. We've got a situation at the moment where a lot of people are frustrated by the red tape. I accept that. It's just not working. It's a dinosaur.
And specific changes, Emma Mellow, to RMA?
Sure. Well, we've said it will be an election commitment and we will start working it in our first 100 days. That means we'll introduce new legislation to Parliament by by the end of next year. We're going to have two pieces, one looking at the environment and one looking for development.
Okay, I just want to pick up on something that just kind of jumped out from something you said there, Helen, about Māori input into those processes, and I want to kind of hark back to some of the Super City legislation stuff actually, and ask you about your views on Māori representation in local body. Because we have an advisory council, and as part of Auckland Council, and around the country, various local bodies have been looking at how they bring in Māori representation to local boards. So if you're thinking about this electorate, Auckland Central, Auckland Council more widely, what would you like to see happen around Māori representation in our local bodies?
Establish a Māori ward. I mean, that's kind of my position on it, and that's the Greens' broad position on it, is that tangata whenua representation is really key there. And I actually have had quite substantive conversations with Nanaia Mahuta, who's the current Minister of Local Government, about potentially moving in that direction. Yep.
National. Emma Mellow?
My understanding is our position that we want to let local government decide what they want to do for that future, but I will say it's really important that we've got a range of different candidates and diversity of people running for Parliament. And I have to say it's great to have three amazing women running in the seat, because we need more representation across Parliament.
Mm-hmm. Helen White?
Yeah, but we're all white.
One in particular.
Sorry. Yeah, we are. Yeah. We're all from a particular background. We've actually got incredibly, alarmingly similar backgrounds. And I guess what I would say is that advisory board at the beginning, it looked like it was having a hard time getting taken seriously, and then it was. And I think that you've just got a powerful group of people emerging who are taking on those roles, and I think it's probably a model elsewhere. So it's a good start. Yeah, it's probably not perfect, and it's really up to the people involved in it.
Totally. Yeah, and I don't think, just to be really clear on that point as well, in the establishment of Māori ward, that could mean multiple councillors therein.
Yep. So you're listening to an Island Life special on Waiheke Radio. I'm Chris Walker, and I've got Chloe Swarbrick, Emma Mellow and Helen White, the three top contenders for the Auckland Central seat. And with us here, so we had some poll results out this week, and which showed you, Helen, kind of well ahead in that poll, and Chloe and Emma, you were quite close neck and neck, but quite a long way back, it has to be said. But I did see that you both sportingly said it was still a 3-horse race.
Well, I think there's also you have to take into account the poll that was kind of headlined didn't take into account the 20% of undecided voters.
The poll was taken when I'd been a candidate for less than a month, and most of that time was during lockdown, so wasn't actually out campaigning. So I don't think it accurately represents the support that's actually building on the ground.
A week is a long time in politics. Give us
And
4.
so is a month.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. And your take on those poll results?
It was really nice to hear it, and I hope it stays that way, but I'm not taking anything for granted. That's right, there's 20% undecideds. And look, I've got some very strong candidates next to me.
Yeah. So so it is going to be interesting. We've got an open race. We've got we're going to end up with a new candidate no matter what. So there's some big decisions to be made, and that's why we're doing this tonight. All right, so it's getting hot in here, isn't it?
It's a great conversation.
Yeah.
It's all the carbon dioxide.
Yeah. It is, yeah. But anyway, let's go around. So you're right, Greet's going to open the door a little bit to let a little bit air in because it is hot. So what I want to move on to now are kind of a bunch more questions we got from the community this week about local issues. I've got one here on housing. Okay, so let me just skim that for you. Where is it? Oh yeah, okay. So housing's one of the major issues here on the island, and just the people's access to housing, the costs of rents is extraordinary. And that's, so we have problems around social housing, we have problems around rental housing, we have problems around people who need to work here not having adequate accommodation. So what would your party do to help Waihekians better afford rental accommodation? Now, I know there's a range of different ways you can do this. You can raise benefits, you can regulate the rental market, you can increase supply. What's your take on what should happen to actually make a real difference for people renting here on the island? We'll start with you, Helen White.
Right. So the government managed to get through just before the close of the last session some really good rental reform, which will hopefully help a lot. It means that there's going to be a lot more secure rental available, and landlords won't be able to put up the rent. We won't have key money anymore, which means people will not be encouraged to flick over between tenants. I think it was actually basically just more expensive to rent than it was to own, and that's getting pretty crazy. We've also, of course, got the warm, dry homes requirements. So these are much better homes than they were. But obviously on Waiheke, some pretty special factors. One is that a lot of the places have been rented to people on Airbnb. And maybe we're not going to have that problem for a while, and hopefully that just takes the pressure off while we get it right. But one thing that we're going to need is we're going to need a lot more like state housing, basically, state-owned housing, affordable housing. Particularly, I'm concerned about the older people on the island because it's pretty difficult in terms of that demographic if you haven't got a lot of money because the prices of the houses have gone up so much. And there is also the rent-to-own scheme, which I think has got a lot of potential on the island. So that means the government will keep in half of its own money and you'll only have to buy the other half. That I'm really hoping will make a big difference. I actually think one of the learnings that I've got out of this over the last few years is that rental is a lot more important part of the equation than it had been given credit for. We were sort of a tradition of always owning your own house, and so all the effort was going on and emphasis was going on there, but we weren't doing what most big cities do, which is have secure rental and really, make those settings right. I think there's more work to be done in the rental space, but it's about making sure that those options are very secure and that you can do something with a rental property that you could do with your own home. So I have talked, it sounds a silly thing, it's probably not such an issue on the island, but I've talked about the need to actually have pets. Like, I find that that's quite often something that's a really important thing for anybody who's actually a little bit, like if there's any mental health issue, etc., it's really important as a thing that makes life good. And yet we have people who just, are in rental accommodation, they can never have a pet. That just seems to me completely mad.
Well, there's also a lot of people on the island who can't have a house at Christmas time because they get booted out. Emma Mellow, what would you do to support people in rental accommodation on Waiheke?
Well, we need to improve and the number of supply. So that comes back to RMA reform. So if you've got more houses being built, that decreases
But of course,
the cost.
we do have houses being built on the island, and those houses, at the moment, the biggest development is Thompson Point, which is high-end, large property accommodation that will be empty most of the year. So we do have that going on, and the RMA will allow more of that to happen. How does it address the rental market for people working on the island?
Well, when you've got greater supply, as I said, you're going to have more properties that will be available on the rental property. Unfortunately, the government's rental reforms will just add costs, which will increase rent. Sadly, it's currently gone up $65 a week. By putting more costs onto landlords, you're increasing rents for those people who at least afford it. But we actually have to get to the crux here, which is the cost of living, right? So actually, if you improve the conditions and employment and opportunities here on the island, you'll have people much more able to afford to live here. That comes back to transport, so those ferry costs, but also the opportunities and jobs that are available here. And we want to support businesses to employ people. We don't want to smack them with extra costs, which will unfortunately cost people's jobs. We want to keep people employed.
But Emma, the employment that you were actually intent on creating was all low wage. It didn't pay the rent. That was part of the problem. You know, I have clients who both parents work and they just weren't making ends meet. And that is an impossible situation.
Well, and currently we've got over 212,000 people on the unemployment benefit. They want work. They want jobs. Work is more than just a paycheck. It's something that's helpful for people's self-esteem.
The paycheck's pretty damned important, and it pays the rent.
And on top of that, I would say that, you know, in terms of ensuring that people aren't this working poor, we need to make sure that there's a guaranteed minimum income in Aotearoa. You know, we have effectively a universal basic income already. It's just only available to those over the age of 65. So I don't know if you're going to be getting into the cost of living, but the guaranteed minimum income is definitely one way to achieve that. What you're hearing effectively is that if we just increase supply, if we just build more homes, then there'll be this kind of trickle down of housing to renters. And look, we've tried that kind of approach with the likes of the tax cuts that the National Party's proposing multiple times over in the course of human history. It's never done particularly well for those who are at the bottom end of the pecking order. I think I'm currently the only person who rents on the panel. So on that, I think that it is incredibly important that actually we are discussing things that may seem radical and loony, but the likes of, for example, rent controls. The Greens are, I think, the only party in Parliament who's said that we're willing to discuss that. So too, in talking about things like the progressive home ownership scheme, that was a core part of the confidence and supply agreement between the Greens and Labour. $400 million released for that, and that will start producing those homes which are designated for folks to move in and begin getting on that ladder. So too, we do need to increase the building of state homes, and this government has done a huge amount therein.
18,000 families are sitting on a wait list, Chloe.
And then when we talk about the wait list of 18,000 families, that is because for the first time the government is properly counting those. So
where do you think those people were?
Exactly.
Because we had people living in cars, Emma. You know, we had families living in cars. We had
how many houses have you built?
Taking on people.
How many houses have you built?
There's currently 40,000 homes sitting vacant in Auckland right now. So again, if we got the tax settings and the incentives right, then those wouldn't be land banked for sake of capital gains. So the final thing is just homes for all. And this is an independently costed plan by the Greens, which will clear that housing wait list in the next 5 years.
That's a big commitment.
Can I just talk about rent control, Chloe? There is, of course, in the latest amendments, control of rents, because they say you can only, like, they are not going to go up. So, and Chris, you talked about people being kicked out at Christmas. I'm hoping that means they won't be, because you've actually got a tenure that you've never had before. And one of the really interesting things in that legislation, I as an employment lawyer, I've always been worried about people taking cases and having their name published in lights because it stops them taking the case. In the rental reforms, that's gone. So you can apply, if you have an issue with your landlord and you go to the rental tribunal, you can actually ask for your name to be removed so that people don't Google you if you dare to take your landlord to court to enforce your rights. That's actually a really big deal.
You can also hang a picture, which is great. I've found that to be wonderful.
Next, it'll be the Alsatian, and I'll be all happy.
I actually really want a sausage dog, Helen. So
I have one.
I know. I've got some next door in my apartment.
So, I mean, because we had a number of questions around housing, and people, people do suggest kind of radical ideas. We have a huge percentage of houses here on the island that are empty. Mm-hmm. And so people have said, do you support initiatives like having a tax on empty houses? We've got...
We don't want to introduce any more taxes, unlike my colleagues here.
What about the other two? What do we do about empty houses?
I think that there's actually a far better way to achieve this through not anywhere near the administrative burden that would be required to do something like a tax on empty houses. Theoretically, you could attempt to levy this by virtue of doing things like monitoring whether the water's being used or the power's being used or otherwise, but you'll achieve that through the likes of the wealth tax. So that is simply about rebalancing both ends of the spectrum and saying we have a deeply unequal society right now. If the top 6% pay and contribute to the society that enabled them to get to that place, then there is an opportunity to raise the floor for everybody for that guaranteed minimum income of $325 a week.
Okay, now you're going to see the sparks fly because it's happened a few times at debates now. I am going to talk about what I think is wrong with this tax. So the tax that the Greens are proposing on wealth tax, it is relevant to your listeners very much because they're actually proposing a tax on unrealised wealth. So somebody who has a house, and a lot of people here that I know would have had their houses from the 1970s, because yes, I am that old, and they have bought a house and it's gone up in value. So if your house has gone up in value, and maybe if you're single and it's over $1 million, you're in for a tax if the green wealth tax came in every year, and you wouldn't have to realise it. If your house, for any equity you have over $1 million, you're going to be charged every year, whether you really realise that or not. So if you're on a low income, but you have a house, most older people would be in that situation. There'd be lots here in that situation. They will actually have to pay money each year, and yes, you can defer it, as Chloe has pointed out, but actually that's not good enough for me. That's the only asset a lot of those people have, and that is their family home. That's an important thing. So I am not in favour of that, I think, and yes, I did call it loopy. It is true. I don't like it. I think it's not a wealth tax. A wealth tax is when you realise wealth. When you sell the macan, yep, I can see Chloe's point that you might want a piece of that as tax, but I don't, and that's not Labour Party policy, that's me, but I don't agree that we should be taxing people while they live in a home. It means if, for example, you have an old couple and one of them dies, you're going to charge them twice as much every year when that happens because they're alone. And
or even a young couple, if you're a single parent now with kids. Well, and we're not actually talking here about KiwiSaver, right?
Let's talk about KiwiSaver.
Your retirement savings. Right?
So we do have an issue here, of course, already with rates. That people, because it's an island, as you say, people have bought their properties a long time ago. Those properties have increased in value exponentially, and the rates burden for some of those people are already
this will double
really
it. It's a big deal.
I want to make it clear that I'm the only candidate here who said they don't support a wealth tax of any form.
Okay. Well, Labour Party actually isn't bringing in a wealth tax, and they have said that they won't. They are bringing in a progressive tax. So the Labour Party...
But you did say you quite like the idea of a wealth tax.
Yeah, I do. I've got to have my own opinions, Emma, and I actually would... I concede Chloe's point that at some point...
We'll let Chloe talk to her point.
But it is a wealth tax.
So on this, I just want to make it clear, and it was actually foreshadowed at the beginning of Helen's contribution, but then there was the real kind of laying it on quite thick about the idea of how this would still impact those older people. But those older people are able to defer the payment in the same way that they currently are with regard to rates through council. So on top of that, I'd just like to say that if you were to, for example, think about, as Emma was speculating, a younger couple, in order to be somebody who is going to be hit by this wealth tax, you would have to, for example, speculate the idea of somebody, a couple who has a $2.5 million home, which is just wild to even begin
young
to
widower?
fathom. $2.5 million home as a couple. As a couple, you then are going to be liable for $5,000 per year. That $5,000 per year will contribute to a take, which in turn will create the guaranteed minimum income and absolutely remove all New Zealanders from below the poverty line. That will raise the floor so that no New Zealander needs to live in poverty in this country. We talk about things like child poverty because we are, as a country, really concerned evidently about the fact that we are, amongst the rest of the world, obviously faring incredibly poorly, but also, this is happening in our own backyard. Do we want to deal with that, or do we want to pretend that it isn't happening and keep tinkering around the edges?
I think,
and to be perfectly honest with you,
that's a little unfair on the rest of us. None of us are sitting here thinking that child poverty isn't a problem.
That's not what I'm saying.
It does feel
I'm
like
saying
it.
that
It's
you're not
a little
proposing
bit
a policy
from
to
the
solve it.
pulpit.
Well, it's not. It's
everybody's
not a policy
trying to
propose
solve it. They just don't agree with you about how to solve it.
But
Yeah,
there is
fine, that's fine.
absolutely no. But there is absolutely no policy proposal that is being put forward from either of the major parties that is meaningfully going to address this as a problem. Okay, if we're going to genuinely grapple with this issue, we need to recognise that under this term of government, the issue. And yes, absolutely, COVID-19 has occurred. We have done a lot of great things in terms of housing, in terms of the environment, in terms of criminal justice reform and otherwise. But child poverty has remained a massive issue, and we only recently have seen a report that has demonstrated that it has begun to get worse. And if we want to tackle that, then we actually need to start thinking about who we are as New Zealanders and what we are willing to do to meaningfully deal with these issues. Are we willing to say that the top 6% of those in our country, not just the top 2%, the top 6%, can pay their contributions to the society through the social contract that enable them to get into that position of the wealth that they hold, which in turn, I might add, would do things like reduce house prices over time because it would remove the incentives to hoard wealth in property.
Well, it actually removes
do we
people
want to tackle
from their
that?
homes. Like, you're talking about some people being able to defer, but lots of people would simply have to sell their homes. So families that grew
It's
up in
not
this
lots
area,
of people,
excuse me, I'm
Helen.
going to finish. Families that grew up in this area, and this is their home, Chloe. You're supposed to be a non-materialistic party, but actually you're forgetting that this is their home. It's a very important spiritual thing. It belongs to their family, and you're going to load them up with debt in that period when they have not got an income to pay it. And actually, if their house goes down in value, I still don't have an answer. Are you going to give it back to them? If you just, it actually assumes that the amount stays there. But what if their house goes down? What if there is a property crash, which happens sometimes, and you have taken $5,000 off them every year in their 40s and their 50s and their 60s? What are you going to do when the house goes down in value? Are you going to give it back?
We would have exactly the same things that was the foundations of the Labour Party, a welfare state that works.
So where are you going to give them back your money? You've said that they're this wealthy, but they're not,
I'm just going to cut this off here for a sec. So because what we've had is we've had Chloe talk about her party's tax policy and how she sees that having an impact for people here on the island, and you've critiqued that. So that's fine. So now let's turn to the Labour Party tax policy. So we've got an increased new level of progressive tax, which will hit the top 2%. What's it, $180,000?
Yeah.
Yep. So tell us about that and how that impacts on Waiheke and what it does for the people of this electorate.
It's pretty simple. It's progressive tax. If you're on that kind of income, then you will pay a higher tax bracket than you have. So it's a very simple system.
So how does that impact on the people of Waiheke? What's the benefit for this electorate?
Well, the people who are here who earn $180,000 will be expected to pay more money in tax. That's about as simple as it is. That probably means a lot of the people who are earning that kind of money are earning it either in businesses here that are thriving, or they're working in the city and they're earning a decent income, but they will have the means to pay it because they'll be on $180,000 or more.
I suppose one of the critiques of the policy has been that it's not enough. That that it's actually too high because the amount of money you bring in from it is, it's half $1 billion. It's $500 million, but $500 million. We've seen this week people throw around billions of dollars like they're change. They've been doing it all day. So why so high? why not bring that down to a level where you can actually make some income out of it, which will benefit the economy, and can still be pitched at a level which will keep the majority of working people at where they are.
Yeah, I've heard that criticism. I guess what I would say is, first of all, above my pay grade. So Grant Robertson's issue and people to make those decisions.
Yeah, but you've got to own it. You're standing for them.
I'm going to own it because I can say that in my office, I have a rule of thumb when I am, because I'm a lawyer, right? And if anybody has called me, they will know. I have different rates for different incomes. So I ask the person on the phone how much they earn. And if they earn under $100,000, I give them a different rate. And if they earn over it, I give them a higher rate. That's my decision. My rule of thumb was 100,000 because I think a lot of families, they just can't afford access to justice if they earn under that amount. And that includes ones that are earning double that because there's two of them, right? It's actually quite a high amount of money in Auckland Central.
So you want to see higher taxes for those over 100,000? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that the government has decided 180.
Labor has decided 180.
I do employment, but I can see that progressive systems are the way to go because of that. Because it becomes a matter, and my rule of thumb is 100 because I think there's a huge difference.
I suppose
just as long as people aren't making money off of their assets.
I mean, I suppose my question
they're
was,
not making money; they're living in their house.
Yeah, okay, we've done that.
Mm-hmm.
So my question was, if we have a party that supports a progressive taxation policy, why not implement a more progressive taxation policy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Emma Mellow, your turn on tax.
Sure. Well,
so,
I'm not the first one to say this, but no one has ever taxed themselves out of recession. We want to give people tax relief to be able to spend here in the local community, here at the local cafes and restaurants and vineyards.
Yes, but hold on. So the median wage on Waiheke is amongst one of the lowest in wider Auckland.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly lower than central Auckland. The temporary tax cuts for those people on lower incomes are minimal compared to what people on those higher incomes are getting. They're getting something like $8.61 a week compared to other people getting $40 or $50
Not enough
a week.
for a block of cheese.
For most people, it will be $3,000 a year. You have to remember that
But not for most people on Waiheke.
There is relief for those who are on low incomes through working through families and other welfare. At the end of the day, this is much more than the other parties are proposing. They're proposing to tax everyone more.
If I can, just on that again, the kind of speculation or the real cool rhetoric that we've never taxed you out of recession. Cool line, but it's not quite true, because again, if you look at the history, the foundations of this country, in the 1930s, when we were the first in the world, arguably, to create the welfare state, we also, well, Michael Joseph Savage, and none of us were alive, created higher tax rates. But again, this is the foundations of this country. It is about everybody contributing. We are supposed to be egalitarian. What do we believe in here?
So I just want to come back to the national tax policy. So, okay, there have been those concerns that the people on lower incomes, which, as I say, the median income on Waiheke is low, and so they won't receive a lot of benefit from that. But I suppose the other part of the national policy is that while you're proposing those tax cuts, you're also proposing 18 months later whopping big tax increases. Because
it's temporary relief.
Yes, but people get very used to having that money in their pocket very quickly. And I'm just wondering about the impact as we're coming out of all of a sudden people have kind of taken breath, they're gone, oh, things are okay for a bit, and then bang.
Well, if you have a
again.
national government, we'll be getting back on track. We've got forecasted $20 billion more debt, and it gets to 200,000 people out of jobs, right? So that's a dire situation. We've got to do something, and actually giving a stimulus to the economy is going to help.
Okay.
$4 billion hole.
That's very rich from a government that leaked its budget before it was due.
You guys hacked
I
it,
mean,
but-
seriously, guys, like human error happens.
I'm sorry not getting involved in this.
No,
All
but
right.
it'd be
Human
cool
error
to
happens.
address it.
Okay,
It'd be
so
cool
I
to
want-
address it.
I want to talk about some other local issues. So we have had a campaign on the island for a long time now, around the marina proposals. So we had the Matiatia Marina, now we've got Kennedy Point. Save Kennedy Point have been fighting that Kennedy Point marina proposal for a long time. But I suppose it goes to a wider issue. So we've got that proposal there. A developer can come along. It's a public space and can put up a proposal. The people in the community can say, "Hey, we don't want this," and they fight that. They, in this case, they had to fight the council even but yet it goes ahead. And I suppose there is a feeling on this island that there's been a bit of a dichotomy. They're kind of like developer, anti-developer, and which is a kind of a crude way of putting it. But there has always been that tension here about which way the island goes, and there will always be people who come here and go, "I can build something big and flash," and there's people who go, "That's not us." So, and we've seen some really intense battles in those kind of areas, and the marina is probably the most prominent one in recent times. How do you propose to strike that balance of giving the local community that say over what happens on their island, and I suppose recognising that people do have the right to come along and make a proposal of what they want to do? So we'll start off with Emma. You can start off on this one.
Sure.
Yep.
I absolutely appreciate that Waiheke wants to keep its uniqueness. It's a very special place, and as a visitor, people can't understand the issues unless they're here regularly and live here, right? And so I've heard that there's been a lot of controversy over these proposals. We need an MP here who will advocate and will listen and fight for the people here, and I think that's the best job that I can do.
Okay, Helen White.
I think one of the things that I've learned in the last 3 years is that the settings are less right than they should be. Like when I first talked about the super city stuff, I could see that there was an upside and a downside, and I can see why people are wild about it, quite frankly, because the setting is quite wrong, and that's why I connected it to the RMA stuff. I think it's actually a really important part of it, that there is more control to identify the kinds of things that are important on the island and keep them that way. The worst thing that could happen to this island is it becomes a suburb of Auckland, and I guess that in a big city there are people who want that to happen, and you've also had the setting where in the RMA if you want to do something, then you have to you're kind of on the back foot as a community trying to stop it happening. So yeah, I think there's quite a lot of work to be done in those both settings, getting it right. We've already discussed it.
And Chloe?
Yeah, so local consultation is a really critical one, but you do hear from people who are really, to use that crude dichotomy again, on the side of kind of development and see it as more so-called red tape if you are able to have that input from the community. So herein I think that there's actually a pretty decent model under Kaianga Order and the legislation that we passed through the House establishing that. It went through Environment Select Committee, and actually Judith Collins sat on a substantial part of that select committee. Didn't agree with a lot of what we were pushing through, but nonetheless. And therein you have a kind of group for consultation, and it is a far more streamlined process than what you're presently seeing under the likes of the RMA and consenting process there. I think that there's also some great parallels to the Overseas Investment Act in terms of unsatisfactory settings at present and how a lot of this stuff can be fixed through that structural change. So under the Overseas Investment Act at present, there are some changes coming through, but there was, for example, the inability to take into account impacts on the environment. There was the inability to take into account te tiriti o Waitangi, and the only thing that had to be taken into account was economic benefit. And that economic benefit is obviously a somewhat subjective test. But that is how you end up with decisions which are adverse to local communities, which are adverse to the environment, which go completely against te tiriti o Waitangi, and you end up with things like plastic water bottling. You end up with things like mining, which is, arguably great in the short term for an economic gold rush, but in the far longer term, in terms of the environmental degradation and the exploitation of our natural resources, it's not. So for us, it's about changing that system so that there is far better community consultation in the beginning.
Okay, so we'll carry on with some of that theme. Marine protection has been something which has been, debated, it seems, ad nauseum for years and years and years. And, and to be fair, a lot of that debate has been local about where and how much marine protection there should be. It's time that something happened, though.
Totally.
So, so for each of you, if you're electorate MP, what are you going to be advocating for? What marine protection will we see you pushing for? Helen White, you can start.
Gee, thanks. I am probably a little bit, I have to be, an advocate on one side of my government here. I think that I think there's a hell of a lot of merit in pushing really, really hard for the Gulf to be protected as far as we can, even economically, even for the rest of Auckland. It's an incredibly important thing. So I definitely want to see, I went to the Gulf Forum last year, and I'm a kind of convert. There was a lot going on there. But obviously I want to see the fishing much more controlled, even probably recreational fishing, although that's obviously something where there has to be a lot of consultation around it. I want to see the dredging stop. There are things like the noises, which are obviously, really, precious, and the places around those, all the beds below them have been really hurt. So we need to see a real focus on the Gulf and getting it right, and changing some pretty big things. And I think I see it as one of the things that I can do as an Auckland Central MP that is a sort of special project, is actually getting that Gulf right, because I can see the benefit for everybody of doing that.
Okay, but I'm not hearing a lot of specifics there. I mean, just one, where do you want to see, how much marine reserve do you want to see, and where do you want to see it?
I think that is there are parts of it already protected, and I understand it's about 30% that we've got at the moment, and
no,
way 0.3%.
Yeah.
I think that
There's a goal for 30%.
Yeah.
there's a goal of 30%.
Yeah, but currently 0.3% is predicted.
Okay, but there are places there are large parts of it that are already, like the Tawharanui area, etc., are protected, and you can see how well that's worked even in the places beyond them in terms of making it healthier. I'd like to see a lot of the Gulf protected. I think there is that balance with also allowing some fishing, particularly recreational.
Okay. All right. Emma Mellow?
Well, Labour's obviously saying a big game on marine protection, and so is Chloe, about to, I'm sure. But the reality is that this government has established no marine reserves. National and government established 11. Chloe has had every opportunity, and so has actually the Labour Party, to sit down with us and get the Kermadex passed, but has failed to do so. We were proposing to roll out fishing cameras on boats. That was stopped by this government, and now I think it's only on 5% of vessels. But to the Hauraki Gulf, as your local MP, it's one of my priorities, right? So sitting down with the
You're
Gulf
not
Forum,
there yet,
asking
sweetie.
them, will be one of my priorities, and I'm going to say what I'll do. So I sat down with the Hauraki Gulf Forum recently, and we talked about actually importance of restoring and protecting. So on the restoration side, we were talking about the importance of water infrastructure. So advocating for the council to do more to actually stop sewage heading into the Hauraki Gulf, really important. Central interceptors are a great start, but there's more that needs to be done. We also have got this issue where you're putting down more shellfish beds, but they're currently working through 3 different kinds of resource consents. This is a bureaucratic nightmare. We need to make it a lot easier for people to do that work, that great work, and that will come into our RMA reform. And then thirdly, there's community groups who are doing great work in terms of planting. We need to support that. But marine protection is something we're very proud in the National Party and want to continue. And the offer's still there for Chloe to work with us on the Kermadex Sanctuary.
So on the Kermadex Sanctuary, given that it was the first thing that was raised, I think it is really important to note that actually one of the major reasons that process ended up being entirely stuffed up is because the National Party went for the lights and the cameras and didn't work through the process there. Iwi and Hapu were sidelined, and as a result there's been a real challenge in continuing to push through and work on
Have
that.
you engaged with them at all though in 3 years?
Marama Davidson has been.
Really?
Yes.
Really? Is any When was it? When did that happen? It's been ongoing for the past 3 years. So,
All right, so
to get to the point of the Hauraki golf.
Yes.
So we announced just actually on Saturday or Sunday our Thriving Oceans plan on Bastion Point before I actually came over here and got involved in a beach cleanup with some local volunteers. And therein I think that there is actually quite a difference between getting your hands dirty and doing things like planting trees. I've actually planted over 1,000 trees with volunteers at Rangihoa Sports Ground, as well as doing things like these beach cleanups. So in this Thriving Oceans plan, we have a proposal to make 30% of our oceans protected, and to also do things like review the quota management system. In terms of the Hauraki in particular, we would urgently, as a matter of priority, phase out things like dredging, like bottom trawling, and like Danish netting. So all of those things are pretty much, I haven't heard any sense of people opposed to that. So it's a matter of actually just knuckling down and getting it done.
Okay. So we've got 10 minutes. So got one more local thing I want to rattle through, and then I'm going to give you all a chance to wrap up. Okay. So you can be thinking about that in the back of your heads. But we have just down from here, just 100 metres from here is Artworks Theatre. Where a lot of local events and productions go on, a lot of
And
local
we need
theatre.
$35 million.
Yeah,
35,000.
They need, we've got a fundraising.
Give them 35 million, yeah.
They'd be very
It's
happy.
just, a few extra zeros.
So they're after $35,000. The reason is because the whole arts world, and the arts scene here on the island, whether it's performing arts or visual arts or whatever, has of course been impacted. And there's a lot of precarious employment and ventures in that area.
Yep.
So, if you're the electorate MP, you're part of the government, what would you do to support those local events, arts groups, theatres, and so on, in our electorate? Emma Mellow, you can start.
Fantastic. Well, I have to say, I'm a little bit of a thespian myself. I sang in the New Zealand Opera when I was 13 years old, and used to be part of the Dolphin Theatre in Onehunga. So love being on a stage. I think Chloe's similar, so a bit of acting at a time.
This is fascinating.
And so absolutely want to support the arts. This particular project, I'd need to talk to our spokesperson for arts and culture.
Jono.
Yes.
Jonathan, yeah. Sorry.
I haven't heard him call that before. She's got all the
He's
ends
a
on
fan.
me. Yeah, she's got the ends on me. But absolutely want to advocate for culture on the island.
But it's a bigger issue though, isn't it? I mean, there's we've got a number of different industries which are getting support, and all of the parties have kind of advocated for kind of support for various kinds of business and industry and research and so on to kind of get us out of the get the economy back in shape post COVID. But this is an important part of a community, these kind of cultural enterprises. So so it's not just about Artworks Theatre. It's about the wider thing. So yes, I mean, I hear you're supportive of the arts, but what will happen? What will you do? What will you advocate for?
Advocate for that. We haven't announced our full arts policy yet, so I can't make any commitments here on radio. But already say I'm a big fan of supporting that local enterprise.
Okay, Chloe.
Yeah, so I was actively involved. I also did bits and pieces in the theatre, but I also used to work at Neck of the Woods, which is a venue on Karangahape Road. And actually, one of the main kind of things that spurred me into politics was the closure of the King's Arms in Auckland and in the city. And that for me was kind of this coalescing of issues where we had lost a venue which had existed to give young local artists a foot in the door, to build an audience, to make mistakes, to take risks, and to build a career, effectively because of really poor planning regulation, where in turn you had a cheap apartment block go up next door. Of course, people ended up complaining about the noise, and that compounded a whole raft of other issues. So I think that, if you're talking about the broader spectrum of how we go about actually addressing and making sure that arts, culture and heritage is part of kind of the rebuild post-COVID, but also actually something that we put at the foundation of society and recognise its importance and value to Aotearoa, is that planning. at a local government level, making sure that that planning is there, making sure that the funding and resourcing is there. There's something quite distinct, though, from just having those venues to also supporting those artists. And on that, the Prime Minister is our main minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage. I don't get all too much time with her around the table, but I have been kind of nagging her office for the reintroduction of what's called PACE, which is the artist benefit from back in the day that you can trace the roots of tons of fantastic artists and musicians to. But also I think a really key and useful thing that we could do to disaggregate issues of addiction and depletion of particularly our most vulnerable communities is to disentangle POKI's funding from funding for arts, culture and heritage.
Okay, Helen White on the arts.
That's an interesting point. I like the one with the POKI's issue. I guess that I was talking to Jacinda the other day when we'd had a criticism over the funding for music, and she was really clear that we are actually absolutely doing our utmost to support a lot of the funding of arts, including music, etc. But there's also a broader issue here, Chris, which is when I was growing up in Auckland Central, there was a very thriving artistic community because it was affordable. Things like affordable housing is an important part of the equation. So has been the wage subsidy. A lot of my friends who are artists went on the wage subsidy. Work disappeared overnight, and they have managed to survive this in this way. So there's the Creatives in Schools program. There's a whole lot of stuff, and it's about not just seeing it in one form, because what I worry about in the arts is I see a sort of formalised form. So you can go and ask for funding from certain organisations, but you have to almost be within the culture. And actually there's a whole lot of really important art that goes round and happens on the fringes. That's the whole point. So like I was in this little art gallery the other day on K Road, and it's the one that goes up, it just goes up a staircase, right? It's just in a corridor. And it's like that sort of thing I'd like to see more of encouraged, more actual fringe stuff go on. And that can only happen when rents are reasonable.
And smaller grants and local procurement.
Yep. Good idea.
Yeah. Although the rents thing, I mean, a lot of these places, here are in council accommodation, so the rent isn't so much the issue, it's the support for ongoing operation.
I'm
that
not
we're
talking
looking
about the rent I'm talking about people actually being able to afford to be artists.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we're kind of out of time, and it's a pity because there's a lot to, we've just kind of touched on their mental health and questions about that. And we haven't got time to do that one, unfortunately, which is a shame because it's a really, really big issue.
Oh, totally. It's the tip of the iceberg, actually.
Yeah, but we do need to wrap up. So I said I'd just give you a kind of a moment, and it will have just to be a moment, kind of a minute or so, just to kind of, you can just freeform this. You just kind of, this is your wrap up. You can talk about what the others have said. You can talk about what you have said. You can say the same thing that you said before if you want, but you've got a minute to kind of wrap it up and tell us why on October the 17th it's you. Now remember, early voting starts on the 3rd of October. And there'll be many more early voting opportunities than last time. So we'll be posting information of those here on Waiheke Radio on all our various kind of forms and so on. But come October 17th, 7 o'clock, once they start counting the votes, and you want to be the one who's at number one. So yeah, a minute to wrap up. So I can't remember who I started with. I started with you, Emma, because you were new. So I'll start with you this time, Helen. Okay, you got a minute.
Yeah, okay. I grew up in this area, and I grew up in Auckland Central, and I've seen it change over a long period of time into a community that's not really affordable, and that's true on the island too. Since that time, I've worked for 27 years as an employment lawyer, so I absolutely understand how important it is to have a decent job and a roof over your head. I hope that you will see that the skills that I've got in that work, the pragmatic problem-solving skills, would make me an extremely good local MP. If you vote for me, I will listen to you and I will learn and I will take the concerns of this community to Wellington as far as that is possible. Thank you.
Cool. Chloe Swarbrick.
Cool. So, I mean, Auckland Central as an electorate has a fascinating history. In 1993, elected Sandra Lee for the Alliance, and even 2008 with Nikki, you elected an electorate MP that was actually the entire opposite of the majority party vote combined in terms of left or right skew. And I think what that shows is that Auckland Central really values independent thinking, it values hard work, and it values a solutions-focused and oriented person. And I believe that with the last 3 years that I've served in Parliament, but also, you know, it wasn't all too public, but my life before that in small business has demonstrated that I am willing to get around the table to essentially work through in collaborative, creative, meaningful ways to come to conclusions on things that people once thought were impossible. I will work hard, and I have demonstrated that I have that solutions-oriented mind. I also don't shy away from things that are controversial, that other politicians don't want to touch with a barge pole. I live in this area, I love it, and I want to see it thrive. So vote Green twice.
Okay. Emma Mellow from National.
Auckland Central's my home. It's a place that I return to after being overseas. It's a place I work and have built my commercial career. Auckland Central needs the hardest working person for this role. Since I've been selected, I've been on Waiheke 6 times in 2 months. I've committed to opening an office here. I will get through the thousands of constituency cases that come across your desk as the MP here and be a strong advocate. And that's all what people want. And that's what I'll deliver.
Okay. Well, hey, thank you to all of you. Thank you to all 3 of you for turning up tonight. And thank you to all 3 of you for standing because, you know, I mean, our democracy requires people to put their hand up and say, I can do this. And, you know, we want to thank all of you for doing that. I want to thank you for taking the time to come to Waiheke Radio tonight and be part of this. It was a shame we couldn't have our live audience, but we have been able to put the questions from our community to you, and we appreciate you answering those. So Chloe Swarbrick, Emma Mellow, Helen White, all standing, the top 3 contenders for our Auckland Central seat. As I say, voting will close on October the 17th. It's a bit weird now having those 2 weeks, but that's the way it is. Yeah, and it's been an Island Life special. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank
you.
So you're listening to Waiheke Radio. Stay tuned. At 9 o'clock, Ashley will be along with a joint conversation, an hour-long conversation with an interesting local. And I can't recall off the top of my head who he's got tonight, but they're always good. So that's at 9 o'clock tonight. We'll just flick you over to some music in the meantime.